A campaigner from Coventry who lost his father in what is being described as the greatest scandal in the history of the NHS says now is the time for answers. Jason Evans lost his father Jonathan after he was treated with infected blood products.
Thousands of haemophiliacs and people receiving blood donations died or became seriously ill with hepatitis and HIV during the 1970s and the 80s. 4 years ago, an inquiry was launched and today they began hearing closing submissions, as Jane Hesketh reports.
This is Jonathan holding his son Jason when he was 4 days old. Jonathan was a haemophiliac and needed blood products to treat his condition. He was given a contaminated clotting agent and contracted HIV. He died when Jason was 4.
For all the people that were bereaved, who lost loved ones to this scandal, there was an immense feeling not only of the bereavement of the loss that impacts someone who loses someone to anything, but also it was compounded by the injustice, the unfairness, the wrong that had been done and for which people fought for 30 years plus to try and get answers to that.
An inquiry was set up 4 years ago to examine how men, women and children were given infected blood products by the NHS in the 70s and 80s. It was heard there was a shortage in the UK, so blood was brought in from the United States. Much of it came from paid donors, including prisoners, and was contaminated with hepatitis and HIV. Victims and their families have been calling for answers and justice for over 4 decades. And now lawyers say their voices have been heard.
These are the closing moments of a process which has been in which they have been totally involved as participants. And it's very, very important that they know that their voices have been heard and appreciate that the evidence has been dragged out, sometimes from the Department of Health and others, but that is important. So yes, it's important that they feel that they have been part of the process.
3,000 people are believed to have died and thousands more were infected in what's described as the biggest treatment disaster in the history of the NHS.
One of the phrases that we've heard repeatedly from the council making submissions to the inquiry today is that this was wholly avoidable, that patients did not receive the best possible treatment, which is what governments have said for decades. I think Andy Burnham put it best in April 2017 when he called it a criminal cover-up on an industrial scale.
The inquiry's findings will be published and handed to the government later this year. For Jason, the fight goes on. Jane Hesketh, ITV News.
Well, the inquiry was set up following decades of campaigning by those affected by the scandal. For years, their voices went unheard as authorities constantly dismissed their concerns. When Jeremy Hunt, in his then role as Health Secretary, gave evidence, he described it as institutions and the state closing ranks around a lie. Well, let's cross live to our correspondent Alison McKenzie, who has been watching today's final submissions. Alison, what was said?
Well, the barrister for the family gave a very powerful summary to the inquiry chair, just to point out that the inquiry chair isn't there to determine whether anyone should face criminal or civil proceedings. He's there to make findings and to make recommendations. He heard from the family barrister that this was a tragedy, a scandal avoidable. Thousands died and many were faced with a brutal, unacceptable and an unnecessary regime of treatment and harm. He said it was a combination of pharmaceutical companies' greed. They charged money for these blood products. Key steps for safety were not followed. And as for the governments over the years, the barrister told the chair that they were insufficient regulations, foresight and planning. Clinicians, he said, were over-enthusiastic with a disregard for the safety concerns. He said all this should come out in the inquiry's findings. He summed it up in this way.
A theme running through our submissions and those of all the other core participants who have given you written submissions for the infected and the affected is that individuals have been stripped of their dignity. They have been forced to lead lives they did not choose. Our theme is that governments have over the years delayed, denied, and have degraded those who are infected and affected by how they have subsequently been treated.
So, Alison, we've got 4 years of inquiry evidence. What happens now?
Well, just to say, already some relatives have received interim payments, but only some. The government, in a statement to me tonight, are saying victims of the infected blood inquiry have suffered enough. The government fully accepts the moral case for compensation and has paid interim compensation to those eligible. The statement to me goes on, this was only the first step. We'll continue to prepare for the conclusions and recommendations of the infected blood inquiry. But it's fair to say families I've spoken to, many have received some payments, say it's not about money, this is about the decades of being ignored, misunderstood, the cases, and they lost family members.
Alison, thank you.